Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Curious John. I've been incredibly inconsistent with this podcast, even though I've told you guys I was going to continue to consistently upload. It's been a weird kind of situation where motivation hasn't been there, and then the days I actually have off are so focused on me just relaxing and not doing anything that adding something to the podcast, or adding a podcast in there, becomes a bit, well, it becomes the least of my priority, if you will. Additionally, those mindsets I alluded to that I can get into relatively easily have been a little harder to get into. I feel like that's a sleep issue, but I digress. I was recommended to sit in a room quietly, not do anything, and see if some motivation occurred. And I guess this is a byproduct of that. And one would say, like, talk about what's on your mind, what you are going through. And some of my thoughts initially come from self-analyzation, right? As I've alluded to a number of times on this podcast, some of the tips and tricks I give you, whether it's those gems that I'm constantly referencing, have been incredibly useful for me. But they've been incredibly useful for me likely because the opposite was very true for me at some point in my life, and now implementing those things maybe fixed or improved my life in a way. That might not be the case for you. I think ultimately, the goal of this podcast, in a way, I don't want to spoon feed you here, is teaching you some sort of self-analyzing skills. The ability for you to take a pause, take yourself out of the proverbial box, and analyze a situation from different viewpoints to allow yourself to get understanding, clarity, wisdom, better life choices from it. It's something that has been incredibly useful for me and has been the underlining topic of most of these gems and or my lessons here. But in doing so, we're going to do a little bit of that today. And as directed, I'm sitting here in a room quietly alone as I watch one of my pups clean herself, I suppose. Nothing weird, weirdos cleaning her eyes. She's got a lot of, face stuff. But anyways, she's kind of now laying down again. Good for you. Living your best life. So, as I sit here quietly, there's one thing that kind of sticks in my back of my mind. Primarily just because of the aproposness of this time of the year. So today is Labor Day 2023, not to date the podcast because I don't like doing that. But today is Labor Day 2023. And today I want to tell you guys a story of what my last year has been like. Very surface level. And why is that important? It's important because I've been referencing for the last year about how busy I am and how difficult kind of things have been as of late and all the things I've kind of had on my plate. But I've never really told you folks where some of those things stem from. So today I'm going to give you a small snippet, probably about 50% of kind of what's been in my day-to-day for the last year, and give you guys a little bit of that. So Labor Day 2022, I received a call from one of the higher-ups in my work, one of the higher leaders. And he called me and he's like, hey, you got a minute? And it's very uncommon, very rare for him to call me. Usually it's something that's needed right away. And I was like, all right, well, let's see what's happening, right? It's not a big deal. I didn't have anything going on. And at the time, he calls me and he's like, hey, you sitting down? And I was like, not really, but what's going on? And he basically alluded to tell me that my director, Joan, she kind of fell ill and she wasn't doing great. And she was kind of technically in the ICU. And this was out of a sudden. I mean, we left that Friday before Labor Day. We left and all said, oh, have a good weekend. Enjoy your time off. She wasn't planning on doing anything crazy. She was just going to enjoy herself, get some downtime at home. And to get that call on Sunday was very unexpected, to say the least. He proceeded to kind of tell me how, things are very busy right now. And he and other leadership want me to step into that interim role because we need to kind of keep things going. And her being critically ill was something that first and foremost, was very unexpected. But secondly, was something that we weren't sure how she was going to come out of it. So after receiving the call, I prepared myself for a very hectic Tuesday morning because the holiday is on Monday, right? Labor Day. And so I basically prepared myself for a very interesting time, to say the least. While my thoughts were with my boss, there's also the task at hand. This isn't a normal situation where somebody hires you and trains you along the way about how the things work, the systems work, the process step by step. There was none of that. It was basically trial by fire. It was get going, get on your bike and just start biking. Let's go. And for the foreseeable future at that point in my life, it was basically putting out fires consistently every single day. I went from working, 10-hour days, 4 days a week, give or take, or maybe 8 5s, to doing borderline 12s 4 or 5 days a week, averaging 50 plus hours a week every week for the last year. And apart from that, I arrived Tuesday morning to find out that one of my other coworkers also had an injury that weekend. And so instead of being a team of 6, we're down to a team of 4. Subsequently, one of the other team members was going to retire soon. So at some point in this year, we also found ourselves to be a team of 2 at the lowest, and then 3 average, because we lost another one along the way who moved to another position. But this is just a small glimpse of kind of what the year has been like. It's been nonstop and working these type of hours consistently every single week for a year. And what can be said about that? I mean, what do you say about that? I alluded a lot to resilience. I alluded a lot to discipline and consistency and perspective throughout this year. I alluded a lot to that because those were the things that really kept me grounded and made me realize what was important, why I was doing what I was doing, and what was the real underlining thing for doing what I was doing. It came at a sacrifice, and it came at a sacrifice to my personal life, probably my family. It came for sure a sacrifice to my pups. It came to a sacrifice to a lot of things that I had to put on back burners, whether it was woodworking projects, my interests, my hobbies, my some of the fitness oriented stuff. I mean, there came sacrifices for sure. And the real thought in my mind to this is saying, like, first and foremost, this is in the back of my mind for a number of different reasons. One, because once again, it's a year anniversary of this happening. But not to keep things in a dark kind of mindset. But since then, my boss Joan has passed away. She had a uphill and then downhill fight with her health. She eventually made it out of the ICU. I went to go see her a few times in the ICU. Eventually made it out, found herself back home with some other underlying issues, and then subsequently there was a third issue that we were all unaware of that ended up, basically eventually being the major factor here, and she subsequently has passed away. And we'll hit that topic of Joan at some point, because there were some realizations made there that I'll eventually get to. But today, the real kind of topic here is to bring you folks into where I am a year later. And as I sit here and do what I initially told you in the very beginning of this podcast, is to analyze and really look at both the lessons, your approach, and everything that has kind of occurred in this past year. And while I'm always been of the mindset that there is always a way to improve, there's always a way to get better, there's always a way to do more, this is one of those situations where I did the very best I could in that moment with the tools I had at my disposal. And because I'm the type of mindset that says, I can always do more, it's hard to say what I just said out loud. But it's the truth. And I know why I did what I did, and there's been to give you kind of close the loop here. Subsequently, in my boss's passing, I've kind of been promoted into somewhat of that role, but it is basically it did provide an opportunity, and it did provide an opportunity because I was able to do what I did, and I hate patting myself on the back, but because of myself and maybe the other team member that really helped out, like we did something that should have not been feasible. Not with the staffing challenges, not with just being dropped into that situation. And it's a huge point of satisfaction in a way to be able to know and do what Joan trained us to do. This was a situation where she was always telling us to be prepared. She was always telling us to have, belt and suspenders was her thing. Yeah, belts and suspenders, basically alluding to the fact that, like, hey, if your belt fails, you still have your suspenders, right? It's have a backup plan. In all reality, one more thing I want to talk about in the years that I've worked for Joan. In addition to her patience, understanding, her willingness to train and teach, she also did something where she would always try to bring you into something. She would always either give you another piece of the work, especially if you were willing to do so. There are some people that are unwilling to take on more work, which I understand. You don't want to feel like you're being taken advantage of. But I will say that because of the things that she brought me into, because of the things that she would give me, because of the things that I was part of, those are the only reasons why I was able to do what I was able to do. Otherwise, there would have been too many things I would have never been able to pick up or understand the process in, and they would have had to bring somebody in to fix everything. And so, a couple lessons to learn here. One is if you find yourself in difficult situations, find your perspective, find your reason for why you did this, why you did what you did. And my purpose for doing what I did was to hold down the fort while Joan recovered and came back, out of a courtesy, out of a respect to her. That was solely my purpose, and that in many ways got me through some difficult, challenging times. So that's number one. Number two is, while you shouldn't be taken advantage of at work, I also do believe that be open to learning things. Be open to attaining new skills and knowledge, because that makes you far more valuable at your next career, at your next job, at just having knowledge that you never had, that you might even be able to implement in other worlds. Just like Joan did for me, it paid off tremendously. Really feels like I don't have a great bow to tie this off with. Like I don't have something that really just finishes off this podcast. And I guess ultimately, hopefully, you see those lessons I'm kind of trying to pull out of this scenario. And you also understand kind of what my last year has been like and what are some of the potential challenges you can allude to that I've experienced in this past year. And while things aren't necessarily squared away yet, things aren't where they should be, things aren't back to a normal cycle of function for our area, our department, our team, they're slowly getting there. And so hopefully in the coming weeks, I can stop alluding to the difficulties. I can stop alluding to how busy I am, and I could stop kind of foregoing certain things and having a better balance, unlike what I haven't achieved in the last year. Ladies and gentlemen, this might be a short one this week, but I just want to say shout out to Joan. I'll never be able to thank her enough for the lessons, the just the laughter, the understanding, her very patient and understanding approach when it came to leadership, just everything. Shout out to Joan, because once again, without her lessons, no way this would have ever been pulled off. And in some respects, like as much as she pushed preparedness, and as much as she really wanted everybody to always be ready to go, because she would often sometimes make, little dark jokes like, hey, if I don't make it in the morning, here's the stuff for the meeting, and it's kind of crazy how that mindset prepared us. So shout out to Joan. May you rest in peace. We miss you. And thank you for the lessons, the laughter, the good times, the variable, untaliable, if you will, number of things that I did pick up from you in the last near decade. And for those of you listening to this, hopefully you've picked up a little bit to think about, something to, once again, pull from these podcasts and apply to your day-to-day. Whether it's just the analytical process of looking at a topic, looking at a scenario, and taking what you can take out of it to become wiser and better. That's this week's podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm LifeGeneralist, and this has been Curious John.